Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this ARWO Liquid Knowledge webinar. My name is Gina Veazey, and I am with ARWO. We're very happy to have you all here today. Um, Before we get started, let me get my screen shared here. Um, sharing. There we go. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping details to share with you all. Um, The session, as you heard, is being recorded and your mic is in mute. You can log your questions as you have them for a Q&A session at the end of our time together. And the replay will be on arwo.org's website. And if you need any help finding that, please reach out to me. Our sponsor today is CoBank, and we are very pleased to have them as a long-term sponsor. And they've been a good partner to the organization. Um, and just as I know, they are a good partner to a lot of you as well. So let me just talk a little bit about what is ARWO. And I think our this year's chair says it really interesting way. And that is that, we're the only organization that's focused entirely on regional water. And that these issues dealing with regionalization and dealing with the unsustainability of so many water organizations is necessary for future success of this industry. And so I'll leave it at that. But the if you're not an ARWO member, we do have a ongoing promotion, and it's basically a prorated membership. So you can, if you join in May, you would pay only for the remaining 8 months of the year. Scan the QR code, or you can contact my colleague Al Rickard, and he can get you set up and have the appropriate discussions about what it means to become an ARWO member. So today we are joined by someone who's come to become my friend, kind of, John Major at the American Deposit Management. John was with us at the summit last 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. We really appreciate his involvement in the organization. Um, He's been for 11, more than 11 years working with public entities and utilities to help them navigate complex cash management and investment landscapes. So I'm going to get your, John, I'm going to get your series information here wrong, but my understanding is registered municipal advisor principal and then certified public fund investment manager. Those sound very impressive. Um, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk to us about, what he does, and how utilities can sort of navigate today, because it is an interesting time that we're in. I'm going to stop my screen share, and you can hopefully jump right on.
Here we go. Everybody see everything okay? Yes, my name is John Major with American Deposit Management, and my credentials are very impressive. We are going to talk about fixed income and treasury management and the AI frontier today. And before we start, I wanted to ask a question. I guess it's a rhetorical question. I can't see anybody's faces, but have you heard of the concept of loss aversion? If you have or have not, it's a theory of cognitive bias where the pain we experience is far outweighing the perceived benefits from the same potential gain. And so this falls in line with another bias, a status quo bias, which is the tendency to prefer things as they are instead of the potential benefits of change. And so I like to call this the safe standing still strategy. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't move, don't change, and nothing bad will happen, which is only sometimes true, but can certainly affect your future returns or future experience if you're always doing that. And so why do I bring that up when we're talking about investments and treasury and AI? It's because the AI revolution that we're living in is potentially making you resistant to change where you don't even know it. So you might be using some of these LLMs or other AI tools in certain areas, but in other areas, it may be something that you resist. And so I want to tease out some ideas on where we are, where we're going, and hopefully help prime the pump, so to speak, on how to think about these things as they come down the pike. So, anybody feel like they missed the good old days when everything was worse? I have an interesting study here from Stanford and MIT that recently looked at customer support agents that used an AI tool to guide their conversations and saw a almost 14% increase in productivity. And it was actually more than double that with lower or less experienced workers. And so there's a lot of value to be captured here. But we may still feel like this meme here that sometimes the old ways are the better ways. So here are the 5 components that I want to cover today. And again, this is meant as more of a primer and some ideas to think about as these new technologies and new inventions come at us with just such speed and the environment that's always changing. These are really, I think, basics of where we are, what you can do, and then what you can think about going forward. So number 1, how and why rates move. Investment options. So whether you are a public entity or a nonprofit, a co-op, we'll talk about what makes sense. Risks and opportunities. That's both on the investment side and in the markets, and also just with these technologies in general. The effect of AI on investing and some of the things that are happening in this space, good and bad. And then lastly, technological efficiencies. So some things that are available now and may be available to you in short order if they aren't already. I have about 30 or 40 minutes of talking here. And so try to keep it short on your lunch hour or just after. And of course, some questions at the end if you have any. So how and why do rates move? Well, you may have guessed it, it is the Fed. They have a lot to do with rates. So we're going to define the Fed. The Federal Reserve, a lot of folks, you might hear this or see the headlines, but you may not know everything that goes into what they do. So this is the system overseen by Congress. There is the Board of Governors, which oversees and sets key regulations, 7 members appointed by the president. That's been in the news recently. There are the individual Federal Reserve banks, 12 of them across the country. They implement policy, supervise banks, and provide services like processing payments for banks. And then there's the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC. This is what is generally being referenced in headlines, news articles when they say the Fed and the Fed meeting. They meet on a regular basis, roughly every 6 weeks throughout the year, and they set monetary policy via open market operations. And the chair of the board is the chair of the FOMC. That particular spot has been also in the news a lot lately. Jerome Powell is the current. The president wants it to be somebody else. But the Fed has a dual mandate. So the reason they exist is for price stability and full employment. They have multiple levers to pull in order to achieve those goals, but the main one is monetary policy. And this is what that looks like. So how does the Fed change rates? It's in the open market, hence the open market committee, because they aren't actually buying securities directly from the US government, but they want to affect the price of securities or treasuries from the US government. So instead, they uh, work through an auction process with primary securities dealers who compete and submit bids to the trading desk at the New York Fed. Those dealers have committed to purchase or sell at the Fed's requested price. So they effectively increase or decrease their own reserves of cash while simultaneously doing the opposite, decreasing or increasing rates. So if you think about it, it's very basic supply and demand. If the Fed wants to lower rates, they would instruct purchases of treasuries. There will be then less supply in the market. Prices will increase and rates will decrease, or vice versa. If they want higher rates, they will instruct more sales, more supply, prices go down, rates go up. That is the most basic function of how the Fed changes rates, and talk a little bit more about how that influences the rest of the market. So hopefully you don't feel like this after that primer on the Fed. Try not to get too much in the weeds today, but really where the rubber meets the road on investment options, making the most of your cash. These options are slightly different depending on your structure. Like I said, if you're a public entity, you will be very limited to these likely or even fewer options. If not, you may have your own investment policy that is restrictive. You might have more flexibility, but generally when we're talking about cash or cash equivalents, you want something that's very safe. And so that's what all of these options are. Step one, though, is determining what your policy is. So if you're restricted by state statute, that's one thing, but if you have your own policy, that's a whole separate issue. Then it's risk tolerance. So you may be allowed to purchase a particular type of investment, but if you or your staff or whoever is managing this for you doesn't have experience there, you may not feel comfortable. So that's a very important piece. You don't want to buy things that you don't understand. We are talking about local government investment pools, securities, bank products, but all of this needs really more of a plan on top of just your policy. So policy gives you the guidelines, a plan based on your specific needs and situation. Like, for instance, I have a $20 million project that I'm going to start next year. What should I do with my cash to maximize it in advance and then during this project? All these other options for besides literally just staying in a bank account are super safe, but have different levels of risk. They aren't all perfectly safe, and they have different levels of return that go with it. So US treasuries and agencies are government debt that you can purchase, have a implicit or explicit guarantee by the government, so as safe as you can get, and so you generally have lower returns. Bank products, there's several here. You're limited on government guarantees. Commercial paper is another one where you can get a little bit higher return for slightly more risk. Short-term unsecured debt from major corporations. So if you think of Apple, Google, Coca-Cola, but if those companies were to go under and you own some of their debt, chances of you getting any of your money back is extremely low. So there is a sense of risk there. Also municipal bonds and what we call slugs or state and local government series direct from the Treasury are specifically for those that issue tax exempt debt. So if you're not in that bucket, then that isn't usually a good option or the best option. And all of these investment options fluctuate in price and value every day, except for a true bank product. So that is not necessarily a bad thing, but you generally have to mark your investments to market, meaning if the value went down, even if you didn't sell at the lower price, you have to, in your financial statements, show that you have an unrealized loss. And on the flip side, an unrealized gain if prices went up and you also didn't sell. So that does bring opportunity to sell for a profit, but also sell at a loss and lose principal if you have to sell before the maturity date of any of these types of securities. So there is risk there. Even if you have government backing, if you need to unwind an investment before you were planning on it, it can be good or bad. It just is all about timing and what's happening in the market. So risks and opportunities. I really love this example. There was a new Google AI that found new inorganic crystals, and these crystals have applications for battery tech and photovoltaic cells in green energy, also information processing in quantum computing. And previously, there were about 20,000 found through human experimentation, but the AI turned out 2.2 million. So 100x increase in the number of potential options, and also predicted about 421,000 that they considered stable, which is a 20x increase. And that represents about 800 years worth of knowledge and work. So the speed at which we are advancing knowledge, technology, materials, science is just really, really rapid. And it's not just in your day-to-day with ChatGPT or Claude. It's really going into every nook and cranny of the world. A little more on the AI situation. This is Jensen Huang from NVIDIA giving a keynote and talking about the stages of AI. So most of us are familiar with that first one, perception. That was speech recognition, the Netflix, Amazon Alexa, all of these things that have been around for a while now. And the second one is generative. So that was the explosion a year or two ago of actually being able to create content from all of this learning data that they fed these models. And what a lot of people would consider intern level work product, you don't necessarily want to just kick it out to an end user, but a lot of legwork can be done there. And then the next phase, which we've really just hit at the beginning of this year, is that agentic system where it can think and act on its own to a very high level. So think about the coding assistants that you may have heard, where we're talking about coders, programmers being able to do the same amount of work in 1/10 the amount of time. So their productivity is skyrocketing. But this is also chatbots for managing customer interactions and analysis of patient data with suggestions for treatment instantly. Also, things like booking a trip or opening an account. That's all very much on the horizon in the near term. And then the last one up there, physical AI. This is self-driving cars and so on. We haven't quite got there yet, but there is a lot of advancement happening. And, this is one of those moral, ethical type questions. If Amazon doesn't need all of these humans to pick and pack in their warehouses and deliver things, then what are all those people that now work there going to do over the next 5 or 10 or 20 years with their lives? All right, so there's definitely risk here, though. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. I love this headline. A finance worker was deep-faked talking to their CFO on video and sent $25 million to the wrong account when they weren't supposed to. So bad things can really happen. Scams abound, especially for folks that are less technologically inclined. And you can imagine if they can do this with video that, something over the phone, voice audio only must be just so simple and easy at this point. And last one here, pretty soon your loan application will be reviewed by a robot. There are already companies that are selling these services to banks where they're using technology not only to review an application, but to actually do interviews. So facial recognition, these softwares that can evaluate your tone of voice and your posture to see if they think you're trustworthy and are going to pay your loan back. So it will decrease risk for banks and others that use these types of systems in their business, but at what cost? Again, there's a trade-off there. What if you give a really bad interview, but you're a great person? Another one here, just to lay the foundation here of AI, Meta invested $3.5 billion in Luxottica. So why would a tech company want to invest in what is essentially a fashion retailer? Well, they have the brick and mortar to deploy all the wearable tech that Meta's been building. You may have seen the Oakley sunglasses with Meta built in, the commercials out there. And this is really the next wave of innovation. You aren't going to have to chat and copy and paste and do all these things on your phone or on your computer. You're just going to have it built into your glasses or your contacts or whatever the system is, and it's going to constantly, the system, be seeing what you're seeing, hearing what you're saying, and responding. You just ask, what about this? What about that? And get an answer in milliseconds. And then the next stage is really where the agentic systems start to take over. If you think about, you're standing in front of a restaurant and you ask for reviews, and then it can book you a table. Or you're looking in your fridge, it sees an empty gallon of milk, it asks if you want to reorder. And these are interesting concepts, but if you think about where we are with the Amazon searches, so many people won't even bother to go to page 2 of Amazon to check what the options are. When you are getting a instant helpful answer or response or prompt to purchase something, I think it's going to be very easy for people to start letting go of the research and the authority there, which is super convenient and may be really nice, but also can be very dangerous if you give that up to a computer that you trust, but is run by a private independent for-profit corporation. So there's a lot of questions here. If any of you remember this movie, I just came across this and thought, what amazing product placement by Gap in the late 90s. But this might actually be the future, where it's so specific and so targeted that you're getting this type of information. I mean, we already see it online, but when you're walking through the mall, if malls still exist in their current form, you might be getting these types of advertisements. So talking then about investments, how will the world work when this kind of big data and AI technology is driving autonomous decisions being made in investment accounts that are based on non-traditional indicators like what is happening on Twitter or X or whatever the next platform is? Well, let's talk about the market. So how does this affect fixed income? And the answer is in many more ways than one. So just as a baseline here, this is where rates have been over the last 50 plus years, all the way from the 18 percentage times in the 80s and slowly trending down over the years, where we had ultra low after the great financial crisis, ultra low interest rates. But we have bounced back and normalized quite a bit since COVID into the 3.5% range. This is the federal funds effective rate. So the amount, or the rate, I should say, that banks can borrow from each other through the Federal Reserve overnight. So the truest liquid cash overnight rate. And then this is the treasury yield curve. So this is government borrowing rates in the US, of course. And you can see the curve here. The blue line is April of last year, very inverted. So in other words, short-term rates were much higher in a lot of cases than longer-term rates, which made most people stay very short-term or even just in cash with their investments in cash equivalents because there wasn't any benefit to not doing that. But if you look at the green line and the gray line last month and yesterday, we're in a much more normal situation where longer term rates are higher than shorter term rates. And so if you think about what this means for investing, we're in a position now where it starts to make even more sense to be looking out for longer terms if possible, even with quote unquote cash, because there's a premium to be earned now. So if you think about just a basic example, if you're taking this chart here and you earn 3.75% for 1 month, and you just keep rolling that, you essentially take whatever the liquid cash equivalent rate is, versus locking in for 2 or 3 years at say 3.9%. The difference there being 0.15 or 15 basis points, not a huge difference, but what is that saying? If you wanted to break even and not lock your money up for that long, the market would have to increase, rates would have to go up by not just that 15 basis points, but maybe double that or even more, depending on how much time you're earning less than that fixed rate at 3.9%. So the market is really telling us here that for 3 years, it thinks that rates are going to be somewhat higher than even 4% because you want to have some kind of parity between the total return if you stayed in cash versus the total return if you locked in. And so that's the balance that we're always looking at. But if rates don't move and you have that spread locked in for 3 years, now you've done better than just keeping your money in cash. And the more that you can roll that out over longer terms with higher rates, the more that you can compound that benefit. So that's really what we're always looking at in cash and equivalents is what is the current rate, what's the longer term rate, and what do we think the market's going to do? If you have a strong sense that rates are going to go down or be the same, then you definitely want to lock in at a higher rate. If you think rates are going to go up, then you wouldn't. You would want to stay in cash or very short term and ride that wave up as rates increase. Let's go a different direction here and talk about sentiment. So I think the next frontier in investing is really sentiment basis. So this is pretty big time stuff. You have to have a lot of computing power. You have to have a lot of data in order to read the tea leaves, so to speak, in a systematic way. But there's so much data and there's so much talk, and all of these systems now can track keywords and can understand phrases and sentences and paragraphs and can then put that into a model and evaluate where they think a particular avenue or stock or industry is moving. So it's not just hearsay, it can be tracked over the long term and data can be plotted and analyzed. BlackRock is already doing this. That's where this example is actually from. The difference here is winners are easy to spot, right? GLP-1 drugs had massive sales success. Those companies are more valuable. Their stock price goes up. That's pretty straightforward. But the second and third order effects can be harder to see, or the losers you may think of as well. Bariatric surgery centers slowing growth, supplements, fast food, obesity treatment, could all suffer negative effects because these drugs are so popular. So these types of releases, news and data that maybe were not as important or looked at very closely previously can now all be added into these models to then have a different sense of where to put money, where to invest money, and where the dangers are by doing that. So this is obviously a stock example, but the same thing is going to happen with bonds and every other investment for that matter. We're already seeing this in financial markets and in banking, which is my next example. So these are reciprocal deposits by bank size class. Reciprocal programs distribute risk, provide FDIC insurance by linking depositors with multiple banks. This is oftentimes a product that is sold by a bank. It's also what ADM does as a standalone company, but you can see the sharp rise in usage across banks of all different sizes over the last few years. And if you don't remember what happened in 2023, it was Silicon Valley Bank failing. And so they had a very profound impact on this market because you can see here they had almost no reciprocal deposits. So lots of deposits that were uninsured by the federal government. You only get $250,000 per bank. So when there was news that they were in trouble, this is a classic run on the bank, but there was a technology twist. So people wanted to move their money. They didn't have to go and stand in line and get it. They went on their phone while they were on the train or in the bathroom and moved their money so quickly that there was almost no time for SVB to really have a chance at finding enough capital to supply them and keep them solvent. So the ability to move money so fast is really what caused their undoing. And this is important for bank solvency, yes, but it's also important for the general consensus on what people are going to do if there's an issue and how quickly they can make changes, which is almost instantly for most people and even institutions. You don't have very much friction, and so the table stakes for paying rates, being secure, staying solvent are just increasing because there's so much less friction for people to move if there's even an inkling of a better deal or a safer place. And we're seeing this with our bank partners and really across the board. So it's making everybody have to be more competitive in order to stay relevant. And ChatGPT is not helping some smaller banks' causes. This is, a 5-second search. It pulls up all the top banks with top CD rates, and pretty soon this will be able to open these accounts on your behalf in minutes, as opposed to hours or days that it used to take. So again, there's so much competition, there's so much information, people are more well informed, yes, on the consumer side, but also institutional corporate side is having the same kind of revolution. And I can't say it enough. If you're able to earn 10 basis points, 20 basis points, half a percentage point more, and it takes you, one prompt to say, open this account and fund this dollar amount, why wouldn't you do that? So bank rates are just going to be pushed closer and closer to parity in order to retain existing clients and not lose them. So do you need to worry? Well, of course, it always depends. I really like this one. I wish I could hear everybody laughing so hard at my meme selections today. This was not AI if you don't remember the screensaver, but I thought it was a nice trip down memory lane. So how can this help you? I love this quote. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. The technologies that I'm going to talk about, or the processes, are all available now. A lot of them are at a very high enterprise level and maybe not available to everyone in their particular system, but they are there. And as these technologies get more ubiquitous and less expensive, these things are just going to be available uh, to probably everybody. So on the cash management side, a couple of providers here, but there's a dozen of them that are doing similar or the same services. Pulling balances, uh, monitoring your cash from any and all systems with a prompt and with uh, little effort is going to be a big step. A lot of these systems can already do it, but it's just going to get easier and easier. The prediction portion of this, where these systems are going to know all of your data and your historicals and be able to see hidden patterns that you may have missed, which then provides opportunity. Scenario testing, being able to simulate potential deficits or investment opportunities and not having to build a spreadsheet in order to do that, but just simply typing or saying a prompt that I have a $20 million capital project next year. I have this much cash. Here's my funding sources. Tell me about uh, 4 different options that will show me different ways I can invest this money, different funding sources that I can bring in to lower the overall cost. And boom, in 5 seconds, it gives you an answer. And now you have more and more information to work off of. Auto execution, so these systems will eventually work on your behalf. This, of course, is where things get tricky. Do you want the system to auto execute on certain things? If there are guidelines, if there are rules, and it doesn't go outside of them, and you have trust, that might be great. But if these systems tend to hallucinate a little bit still, or we don't have kind of this 100% certainty they're only going to do what we tell them to do, that might be a different question. And then lastly, on auto reconciliation, real-time connection to all of your systems, to all of your statements and holdings and assets, and being able to make forward projections and hypotheticals and tweak those and toggle those and play around to see where multiple factors would impact your bottom line. This is all going to be driven by prompts. So it's not going to take a programmer or a whole team of people that understand the nuance of building these models. You're just going to be able to ask the system. And then last here on accounts payable, invoice processing. So reducing manual input by staff, obviously reducing errors, detecting red flags or other anomalies, which is going to help prevent fraud and under payments, which is then rework, automating procurement. So speeding up your internal processes when there doesn't need to be 5 people involved, but there is. Payment innovations like virtual cards. This is new in the last couple of years, where you're getting a card, it's a one-time use for a vendor, and you can actually reduce fraud because there's no card number to steal, and increase revenue because you can get rebates and other benefits from the providers of these cards and services. And then vendor management, having compliance reporting and requirements handled directly by software. Some of the options here, we do this at American Deposit Management, but there's plenty of other places. And again, these are systems that can, depending on which ERP you're working in and what other systems you have, may or may not be the best solution, but as these capabilities are just established and become more ubiquitous, I think a lot of the providers are going to be able to add these types of services even if they don't have them now. So that is all that I have for AI and treasury management. any questions?
We did have some questions come in. Let me get back to my video here. Um, so trying to think about what order to present these in. So what are your thoughts about guardrails for AI, and particularly as it relates to financial transactions? And here I'm talking about policy or even regulation or
Yeah, great and complex question. Uh, my personal opinion is that there does need to be regulation. As I mentioned in the presentation, all of these companies that own these models are for-profit corporations. They have no reason really to be good for people or good for the environment or good for anything except themselves. So there may or may not be people inside those companies that have different views, but I don't think that we can just trust that the models that are filled with tons of everything from the internet at large are going to do what's in the world's best interest. So it's a very difficult question. It's above my pay grade. There's a lot smarter people that are working on it, but I'm sure there will be regulation. I'm sure that it's necessary, and I think that's probably, if I were to guess, where a lot of folks have that stand still safely mentality. If you don't do AI and you don't do these programs, then you don't have to worry about those things. But are you going to get left behind by
yeah.
your competitors, or just is your life going to be that much more difficult because you aren't? So that is the tough balance that we're all going to be fighting in the years to come.
Well, and that kind of leads me to the next question, which it was about AI haves and have-nots in the future, right? Right now, many AI tools, at least the basic ones, are free or nearly free, right? And that may not be the case across a more enterprise application, but um, there's a lot of speculation that that's not going to remain true, and that we're going to all get used to the conveniences and helps that an AI driven um, assistant can help with, and that as those get monetized, that it's going to price a lot of people out. Is that also a concern when it comes to utilities? And when you think about it at an enterprise level as well?
That's a really good question. I've not thought about it from that specific angle.
That's okay. I
I,
didn't
w-
mean
I would
to put it in
say
the spot there.
just generally what I've heard and in talking to folks that are, programmers and builders of systems, there's also a deflationary piece to this where
I may be
um,
losing my internet connection here.
things are going to be less expensive because somebody can build it in 10% of the time it took them previously. So while I think there's just going to be a shift of what you pay for. I wouldn't say that, none of these models seem to be going towards we're just going to keep raising the price. Now that might be true, but uh, I think there's a different side to that story that may help offset, when it costs the developer a lot of money to use that system, but then they take 10% of the time to build whatever they need. When they're selling it to the market, is it really going to be that much more expensive when they can be that much more efficient? So definitely a concern and something to be aware of. But the way that it's going now, I think they're trying to monetize as much as they can. They're not trying to They want everybody using their system. The more data they have, the better the system is, the more they can charge. So uh, that's what I got on that.
Gotcha. So we had a question come in about, early on in your presentation, you talked about the executive who'd been duped by their CFO on a deep fake, right? Or a deep fake of their CFO was so convincing that they, wired up, I forget the number, but it was like an astonishingly large number. So what's the best practice? I mean, how can utilities, be prepared for, if you can do video, you can do audio. I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, great question. Uh, the background of that story is this person was a sort of lower, it's a very large company. Obviously, they had $25 million extra laying around. And I don't think this particular person was, it's not like they were on the CFO's direct team. So it was definitely a scam, right? They found someone that they thought, that had access, that probably didn't talk to the CFO very often. And so some of it's on the person. Why is the CFO asking me to do this? And maybe I should just call them and make sure, like, hey, you sure you want 25 million to go to this account? Like a lot of these scams, if you go to the second step of verification, then you wouldn't have that. So I think it's just being, just like email phishing or anything else. If you know it's out there and you know some things to look for, then you're not going to, you want to take that extra step and trust but verify. Anything that's on the internet can be messed with. So I guess phone lines are on the internet these days too. But uh, if you have two forms of verification, I called your direct line, your cell phone, and you picked up and said yes. If you get to that level of scamming, then I don't have an answer. But yeah, trust but verify.
Just to verify. I like that. Um, okay. Couple more things. So as AI takes an increasing role in reviewing financial applications, how might the appeals process change? And as more people or organizations are, um, um, want to appeal the decision that might have been made.
Yeah, and that's a big question for banks and institutions that are using these systems because they are highly regulated to not discriminate. And when you have a model like this, you have to be able to prove out what the decision process was, as opposed to a lot of the models now that you hear people say that even the researchers don't know exactly how it's working and how it's doing what it's doing. So uh, there is a process, but you also need to be vigilant. I've I've heard uh, people in the market say that they will provide you with the process, but it's going to be a 500-page document of the analysis that the AI did on you, and it's going to be really, really difficult to fight that because they're going to have so much information that just a one individual that's upset because they didn't get a loan is going to have a hard time. Now, maybe there'll be class actions, and there's obviously other avenues for fighting those kinds of things, but uh, this is also the balance for banks. Do you want it to just be an online marketplace where somebody goes and they have to have all the things, and then you don't have any real autonomy or authority as the bank? It's just your system. Or do you want to be a institution that has people and has relationships and has these things that sort of transcend just pricing and availability of some product. So I think it's existential for banks, and the consumer protection and all these different areas of the government are going to I'm sure there'll just be endless debate and rules and all kinds of things that come out. So the bottom line on I think most of this is if you're aware, then it's a lot easier to understand what's going on and not get in a position where you missed out or had a bad experience.
Okay. All right. I am going to thank our speaker. First of all, thank you very much for being here, but I'm going to move us along. Um,
Thanks
one
a
of the
lot.
things I wanted to uh, plug, I guess, is our board governance workshop that's coming up in partnership with a Road Water Lab and AMWA, the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. Um, board governance is so important, and we ask people to join our boards. And it's important to give them, some some context and training, right? So that is, we're expecting to have an agenda soon for this event, and but in the meantime, make sure this gets on your board of directors radar and on their calendar, because it is going to be something that's worthwhile. We've heard a lot of people um, really clamoring for this kind of an event, so we think it's going to be very well attended. Um, and then the last thing I have for y'all is that we have another webinar coming up. We may have one in May as well, but the next one that's scheduled currently is on June 3rd, and it features, in fact, the executive director at Rogue Water Lab, Chelsea Boozer, who is just an amazing person. I'm such a fangirl of Chelsea. But she's got some research to present for us about messaging and how we message in a crisis, which can be very important. And of course, you won't know which day it's going to be important until it is. So it's going to be a nice presentation, and you can click on the URL there to register, or everything, of course, is on our website. So with that, we are at 56 minutes into the hour, and so I suppose that you all have found 4 minutes in your day, which may or may not help, but I hope that it does. Thank you all for being with us today, and we look forward to connecting with you on our next webinar. So, and again, thank you so much to our speaker for today.